Ryan opened his eyes slowly, and at first he thought he was dreaming. The sky above him was not black or blue, but painted in strange glowing colors, streaks of purple and green that moved like rivers of light. His head hurt, blood dripped down the side of his face, and his ears still rang from the crash. He tried to sit up, and sharp pain shot through his chest. The last thing he remembered was the alarms screaming on his ship, the fire spreading fast, and then darkness when he hit the ground. Now he was lying on soft moss that seemed to glow faintly under him. Every plant around him shimmered in the dim light, as if the forest itself was alive. He breathed slowly, trying to stay calm. He was a soldier, trained for danger, but nothing could prepare him for this world. The air smelled sweet, almost too sweet, and insects with glassy wings hummed above the flowers. Far away, something roared, deep and long, like a predator warning others to stay away. Ryan forced himself to move, gripping a broken branch to help him stand. His leg hurt, but it was not broken. He looked around, trying to find his bag, his weapons, anything that survived the crash. But before he could take a step, he froze. There were footsteps, light, careful, and coming closer. He crouched low, his heart racing. Maybe it was a predator, or worse, maybe it was one of the planet's people. He had no idea if they would be hostile or peaceful. Slowly, the sound grew louder. Then, from the shadows between two twisted trees, a figure appeared. It was tall, slender, and glowing faintly in the strange light. Ryan blinked, shocked. It was not a monster. It was a girl, not human, but clearly female. Her skin had a smooth silver pattern, like shining tattoos flowing down her arms and neck. Her hair was long and pale, almost white, and her eyes glowed faintly with a silver light. Sharp and curious. She was dressed in a strange cloth that seemed woven from threads of crystal. For a moment, Ryan almost forgot to breathe. The girl stopped a few steps away, staring at him like he was something pulled out of a nightmare or a dream. She tilted her head, her lips parting slightly as if she could not believe what she was seeing. Ryan stood still, afraid any movement would frighten her or trigger her to call others. Then, her gaze lowered slowly. Her shining eyes stopped halfway down, then dropped further. Ryan realized too late what she was staring at. The crash had ripped part of his uniform, and as he stood in front of her, she saw the outline of his body clearly. Her eyes widened, her face tightened, and she gasped softly as if she had discovered something impossible. For a long second, there was silence. The strange forest buzzed around them, but she did not blink, did not move. Her lips trembled slightly, and then she whispered in a voice that was both curious and afraid, "Human, what is that hard thing?" Ryan's face burned hot. His muscles tensed. Of all the dangers he expected on this planet, this was not one of them. He tried to adjust himself, tried to step back, but her eyes followed every movement as if she was staring at a weapon. There was no shame in her voice, only confusion and a spark of fear, like she thought he was carrying some hidden tool of war. Ryan raised his hand slowly, trying to show he was not a threat. It's not what you think," he said, but his words sounded weak even to himself. The alien girl frowned, not understanding his language, but his tone made her hesitate. She tilted her head again, her glowing hair shifting as the forest light caught it. She looked almost childlike in her curiosity, but her muscles were tense, ready to flee or fight. Her hand moved near her side, where a small crystal blade hung on her belt. Ryan knew if he made the wrong move, she could strike him before he even had time to react. She took one slow step closer, her eyes still locked on him, and then raised her hand as if she wanted to touch, but stopped in midair. She pulled her hand back quickly, her breath sharp. She whispered something else in her strange tongue, her voice low, like a secret. Ryan could not understand the words, but the way she said them made his chest tighten. She was not only curious, she was afraid. Afraid, yet unwilling to run. That meant something. Then in the distance, Ryan heard more footsteps. Heavy ones this time, many of them, moving through the trees. Voices called out in her language, sharp and commanding, growing closer every second. The girl's eyes widened, and for the first time, her fear was not directed at Ryan. She turned quickly, scanning the forest, then looked back at him. Her silver eyes burned with urgency. She leaned close enough for him to hear her whisper, her voice shaking. "Hide, human. If they see you, your hard thing will bring you death." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and pulled him behind the glowing trees. Ryan's heart pounded as he crouched in the shadows. He could see shapes moving between the trees, tall figures carrying crystal spears, their armor glowing faintly like molten stone. They were hunting, searching, their voices echoing through the night. The girl pressed a finger to her lips, warning him to stay silent. Her touch lingered on his arm, and he could feel her trembling. She had chosen not to call them. Instead, she was helping him. But why? She still did not understand him, and she thought his body was dangerous. Yet here she was, risking her own life to protect him. Ryan's chest tightened with confusion, fear, and a strange flicker of hope. He had no idea what she wanted or what she would do next. But one thing was certain. The moment she whispered those words, his fate and hers became tied together. Kalira's eyes did not leave him, even as the voices of her people echoed closer through the glowing forest. Her grip on Ryan's wrist was tight, as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. He could feel her pulse racing, fast and uneven, and though she was clearly afraid, her eyes still carried that strange mix of curiosity. She whispered something in her tongue again, words that Ryan could not understand, but the way she spoke made him think she was asking him a question. Her eyes lowered once more, then flicked back up sharply as if she was warning herself not to look. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, but her stare was unbreakable. The sound of heavy boots crunched the glowing moss nearby, and Kalira pressed him harder into the shadows of the tree. Her breathing slowed, steady and practiced, like someone used to hiding. Ryan tried to keep still, his heart pounding in his ears. One of the alien hunters passed so close he could see the shimmer of his crystal armor and the spear glowing faintly with red energy. They stopped, sniffed the air, and then continued on. Ryan dared not move until the sound faded. Only then did Kalira release a shaky breath, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. She turned her head toward him again, and in a broken attempt at his language, she said a single word that shocked him. Danger. The way she spoke it was clumsy, but the meaning was clear. She knew at least one human word. Ryan leaned closer, whispering, "Yes, danger." He tapped his chest. "Human." He pointed at her. "You?" She blinked at him, tilting her head, then tapped her own chest. Kalira. The name rolled from her lips like flowing water. For a brief moment, the chaos outside seemed to fade, and Ryan found himself staring at her, realizing she was not his enemy. Not yet. But her eyes moved down again, stubbornly curious. She pointed at him in a sharp, almost accusing way, whispering something in her tongue. She tapped her own waist where her body was smooth and flat, then gestured toward him again. Her voice lowered into a hiss. "What? Why?" Ryan's face flushed hot. He shook his head quickly, trying to explain, but how could he? Her people had no such thing. To them, this part of him was not natural. She looked at him like he carried a secret weapon strapped to his flesh. The fear in her eyes mixed with fascination made Ryan realize the danger. If she told her people, they might not just kill him. They might take him apart to understand him. He raised his hand slowly, whispering, "Not weapon, not danger." He pointed at his heart, tapping it firmly. "Me, human." He tried to make his words soft, gentle, hoping she would understand his tone, even if not the meaning. Kalira narrowed her glowing eyes, studying him carefully. Then, slowly, she stepped closer, her silver hair brushing against her shoulders as she leaned in. Her fingers hovered in the air, trembling as if fighting against themselves, before finally pressing lightly against his chest. She felt the thump of his heartbeat and gasped, her eyes snapping to his face. She whispered in awe, "Strong." Before Ryan could respond, another voice shouted from deeper in the forest, closer this time, angrier. Kalira's entire body stiffened. She grabbed his arm again and pulled him into motion. Ryan stumbled after her, his body still weak from the crash, but she was fast, moving like a shadow between the glowing plants. They darted around roots as large as walls, crossed over streams that shimmered with liquid light, and slid under low branches that seemed alive. Every few steps, Kalira glanced back at him, her expression hard, as though she was regretting bringing him along, but unable to stop herself. Ryan whispered harshly, "Where are you taking me?" Of course, she didn't understand, but her expression told him enough. She was hiding him, but not for long. The shouts grew louder, and the pounding of alien boots shook the ground. Kalira suddenly pulled him behind a curtain of glowing vines and pressed him against the stone wall of a cliff. Her body leaned close to his, her hand covering his mouth as the hunters passed just beyond the vines. Ryan could feel her warmth through her crystal-threaded clothing, her hair brushing his face as she held still. The hunters' voices rumbled on the other side, and for a moment, Ryan thought they would tear through the vines. But then the sound moved farther, fading into the forest again. Kalira lowered her hand from his mouth, but did not step back. Her eyes were locked on his face, searching, demanding. She whispered something in her tongue, but this time her voice shook. Then she repeated the one human word she knew: danger. Her eyes burned with meaning, and she pointed at him again, then at the direction her people had gone. You, death. The words were broken, but Ryan understood. She believed if they found him, they would kill him immediately. He swallowed hard, realizing how fragile his situation was. But still, she had not betrayed him. She could have called them, could have ended this. Yet she stood here warning him. Ryan touched his chest again. Human. He looked at her seriously. No death. His voice was quiet, calm, steady, the way soldiers were trained to speak when everything fell apart. Kalira's lips pressed into a thin line, her silver eyes narrowing. She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped back slowly, watching him as though she was still trying to decide what he was: enemy, prey, or something else entirely. The voices of her people echoed again, far away now, but still close enough to bring fear. Kalira's hands tightened into fists. She looked back at him one last time before turning toward the shadows of the forest. She motioned for him to follow, her voice low and urgent. Come, hide. For the first time, Ryan felt a strange sense of trust bloom in his chest. She was risking herself for him. But why? Was it curiosity, pity, or something deeper she didn't yet understand? He didn't know. All he knew was that he had no choice. He stepped after her, deeper into the alien jungle, with danger at their heels and mystery in her eyes. Ryan followed Kalira deeper into the glowing jungle, his boots sinking into moss that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Every step felt heavier, not only because of his injuries, but because he could hear the hunters behind them. Their voices rose and fell like a chant, words sharp and angry. He did not understand their language, but the rhythm carried one message clearly. They were hunting him, and they would not stop until he was found. Kalira's pace was quick, her silver hair whipping behind her as she moved like she had walked these paths all her life. Ryan stumbled once, catching himself against a tree, and she spun around instantly, her glowing eyes flashing with urgency. She pressed a finger to her lips, warning him to be silent, before pulling him forward again. They crossed a stream that shimmered with pale light, the water running over stones that looked like glass. Ryan's reflection was broken in the ripples, a reminder of how out of place he was on this world. Kalira's eyes flicked back at him often, always sharp, always questioning. She still could not stop staring at him like he was some puzzle that did not belong. Her gaze lingered again, her lips tightening, as though she wanted to ask another question, but knew this was not the time. Ryan felt the tension in the air growing heavier with every step. The forest itself seemed alive, its plants opening and closing slowly as if watching them pass. Then a sharp whistle cut through the air. Ryan froze. Kalira's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. From the shadows to their left, a tall alien hunter stepped into view, his crystal spear glowing red. He had spotted them. His mouth opened, and before a single word could escape, Kalira grabbed Ryan and shoved him hard to the ground. A spear shot through the air where Ryan had been standing, striking the tree behind him. Splinters exploded, glowing faintly like sparks. Ryan rolled in the mud, his body instinctively reacting. The hunter lunged forward, raising his weapon again, shouting in a language Ryan did not understand. Kalira hissed something sharp back at him, her voice urgent, commanding. For a moment, the hunter hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and Ryan. But then, another hunter appeared through the glowing vines, followed by more. Their eyes all fell on the human, and their voices grew louder, chanting the same word again and again. Ryan felt his stomach twist. It was his presence that brought their fury. They closed in fast, spears ready. Ryan grabbed Kalira's arm and pulled her down with him, just as another spear flew, the tip grazing his shoulder. Pain tore through him, hot and sharp, but he forced himself to keep moving. They rolled through the mud, landing behind a wide route, the earth shaking as spears struck above them. Kalira's eyes were wide with shock. She had seen how fast he moved, how strong his pull had been. She whispered something to herself, her lips trembling. Ryan could not catch the words, but her expression told him enough. She was realizing he was not as fragile as she first thought. He gritted his teeth, grabbed a heavy branch nearby, and stood as one of the hunters charged. With a swift swing, Ryan slammed the branch across the hunter's chest. The crystal armor cracked with a sharp sound, and the alien stumbled back, gasping. Ryan's chest heaved, his body screaming with pain, but adrenaline kept him on his feet. Kalira stood frozen, her silver eyes wider than ever. "You," she whispered in awe, her voice breaking. Fast, strong. She had never seen a male fight like that, not with such wild, desperate power. But the hunters were many, and they were closing in. Ryan knew he could not win against all of them. He grabbed Kalira's hand and pulled her toward a narrow path between two massive roots. She resisted for a moment, staring at him as though caught between fear and wonder, but then followed. Together, they dashed through the opening, the hunters' angry shouts echoing behind them. The path twisted sharply, lined with glowing vines that wrapped around the trees like veins. The hunters were right behind them, their spears slicing through the air, barely missing as Ryan and Kalira ducked and slid through the narrow spaces. One spear struck close, cutting a line across Ryan's arm. Blood ran down, mixing with the glowing sap of the vines. Kalira grabbed his arm, her touch firm and steady, but she did not stop running. Her strength surprised him. Despite her slender frame, she pulled him forward with determination, as if refusing to let him fall behind. They burst into a clearing where the ground dropped sharply into a pit filled with glowing water. Ryan stopped at the edge, his breath ragged, staring at the impossible sight. The pool shimmered with light, its surface alive with colors shifting like flames. The hunters' voices grew louder as they closed in, but Kalira grabbed his arm and pointed at the water. Her voice was urgent, filled with command. "Jump." Ryan's eyes widened. He looked back at the hunters, then at the strange pool. It could kill him, burn him, drown him. But Kalira's eyes left no room for hesitation. She trusted this path. He had no choice but to trust her too. They leaped together, plunging into the glowing water. It was not cold, but burning hot, though it did not harm him. Instead, the energy surged through his body, flooding his veins with light. For a moment, he thought he was dying. His lungs screamed, but Kalira grabbed his face under the water. Her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever, steady and calm, guiding him. Then they surfaced on the other side of the pool, gasping for air. The hunters stood above the pit, their spears raised, but none dared to follow. They shouted angrily, their voices echoing, but they did not leap. They feared the water. Ryan dragged himself onto the shore, coughing, his chest heaving. Kalira climbed out beside him, dripping with glowing droplets that clung to her skin like stars. For a moment, she just stared at him, her lips parted, her eyes unreadable. Finally, she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and confusion. "You move, not like us. You fight, not like us. Human, what are you?" Ryan had no answer. He sat in the mud, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. The hunters shouted above, their shadows dark against the glowing forest, but Ryan felt something shift between him and Kalira. She no longer looked at him only with fear or curiosity. Now, there was something else in her eyes, something that felt dangerously close to belief. Kalira led Ryan away from the glowing pool, deeper into the jungle, where the air grew heavy and the trees bent toward each other like guardians keeping secrets. His body ached from the wounds he carried, his shirt torn and stained with blood, but he forced himself to keep walking. Every sound in the forest made him tense, expecting the hunters to appear again, but Kalira moved with confidence, as if she knew a place where even her people would not dare to follow. She glanced back at him often, her silver eyes unreadable, her steps fast but silent. Ryan tried to match her pace, though every step sent pain shooting up his leg. He did not want to slow her down, not when his survival depended on her. The path grew narrow, winding between jagged rocks that glowed faintly with blue veins of light. The glow became stronger as they moved forward, until the rocks themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing in rhythm with some hidden force. Ryan slowed, his eyes wide. He had never seen anything like it. Kalira stopped at a large opening in the cliffside, her hand brushing gently across the stone surface. The wall responded, glowing brighter under her touch. She looked back at Ryan, her face serious, before whispering in her own tongue. Then, in broken human words, she said softly, "Forbidden, but safe." She pulled aside the curtain of vines covering the entrance and motioned for him to enter. Ryan hesitated. He could feel the strange energy radiating from the cavern, and part of him wanted to turn back. But Kalira's eyes were steady, urging him forward. He ducked under the vines and stepped inside. At once, his breath caught. The cave was alive. Crystals jutted out from the walls and ceiling, glowing in shades of blue and white, casting shimmering light across the stone floor. The air vibrated faintly, humming like a low song. Ryan lifted his hand, and as he brushed one of the crystals, it pulsed brighter, reacting to his touch. He pulled back in shock, but the glow stayed, spreading down the crystal like fire running through glass. Kalira entered behind him and froze when she saw what happened. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. She whispered something fast in her tongue, her voice shaking. She stepped closer, her gaze locked on the crystal that was still glowing from his touch. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on the same surface. The glow did not respond to her. Only when she looked back at Ryan and pointed toward him did her voice carry the weight of awe. "You, it listens." Ryan frowned, not understanding fully, but he could feel it too. The cave seemed alive, and it was reacting to him. He walked further inside, each step causing the crystals around him to brighten slightly, lighting his path. Kalira followed closely, her expression torn between fear and wonder. She whispered to herself, her voice soft, as if she was speaking prayers or secrets not meant for others. Ryan touched another crystal and felt a faint warmth spread through his hand, traveling up his arm like the energy was trying to connect with him. His chest tightened. He wondered if this place was somehow tied to him, or if it was simply reacting to something in human biology. Either way, Kalira's stare told him one thing. This was not normal for her people. At the center of the cavern, a massive crystal grew from the floor like a frozen flame. It glowed faintly, its surface smooth and perfect, reaching taller than both of them. Ryan approached it slowly, his reflection stretching across the surface. He raised his hand hesitantly and touched it. Instantly, the entire cavern flared with light, the crystals singing in a low hum that vibrated in his bones. Kalira gasped, stumbling back as if she could not believe what she was seeing. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "Impossible." Ryan pulled his hand away quickly, the light fading back into a dim glow. He looked at Kalira, trying to read her face. She stepped closer, her silver eyes sharp, almost accusing now. She circled him slowly, whispering in her own tongue, then finally said in halting words he could understand, "Not normal, not man. Maybe danger." Her words cut him like a blade. He clenched his fists, struggling to respond, but he knew she was right about one thing. He was different here. And if her people found out, they would never let him live. Kalira stopped in front of him, her face close, her eyes burning with questions. "Why you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. She touched the crystal again, then his chest. "Strong, but not like us. Cave listens to you." Ryan shook his head, whispering, "I don't know." His voice was honest, tired. He didn't know why the crystals reacted to him. He didn't even know if he could trust her yet. But something about the way she looked at him made his chest tighten. She was not just afraid of him anymore. She was afraid for him. Before Ryan could say more, a low rumble shook the cave. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the crystals pulsed faintly as if warning them. Kalira stiffened, her eyes darting toward the entrance. She whispered sharply in her tongue, then looked back at Ryan with fear. "Hunters," she said. Ryan's stomach dropped. The glowing trail he left behind had betrayed them. The cave that protected him might now also expose him. Kalira grabbed his arm tightly, pulling him toward the back of the cavern. Her voice was low, urgent. "Hide, deeper, fast." They ran deeper into the glowing cavern, their shadows stretching across the crystal walls as the sound of alien voices echoed at the entrance. Ryan's chest heaved, every step sending pain through his wounds, but he kept moving. Kalira led him toward a narrow tunnel, branching off from the main chamber, the crystals dimming around them as if protecting their secret. Ryan glanced back once, seeing the glow of spears entering the cave, hunters shouting in anger. He ducked into the tunnel just as Kalira pulled the vines across the opening, cloaking them in shadows. They crouched in the narrow space, their breaths shallow, the hunter's footsteps echoing in the chamber beyond. Kalira pressed her body close to his, her hand gripping his tightly. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, locked on him with a strange intensity. She whispered so softly he almost didn't hear. "If they know, you die. But why? I still keep you?" Ryan had no answer, only the pounding of his heart in his chest. In that moment, he realized something had changed. She was no longer just a guide, no longer just curious. She was making a choice, one that could cost her everything. And though the hunters searched only a few steps away, Ryan's mind was caught on her words, knowing this choice would shape both of their fates. Ryan sat in the narrow tunnel, his back pressed against the cold stone as the faint glow of the crystals lit his face. The voices of the hunters echoed faintly from the main chamber, their angry shouts bouncing across the walls like thunder. Every sound made his muscles tense, but Kalira's grip on his wrist anchored him in place. She stayed close, her breath slow and controlled, though her glowing eyes betrayed her fear. Ryan could see it. She was torn between running and staying, between betraying him and protecting him. He waited for the moment she would let go and call out to her people, but it never came. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice low and strained. "They find you? Death." Ryan nodded, whispering, "I know." He tapped his chest, his hand trembling with fatigue. "Human, not danger." His words were soft, but the weight behind them was heavy. Kalira stared at him for a long moment, her silver eyes sharp, as if trying to cut through his soul. Slowly, she released his wrist, but she didn't move away. Her hand shifted instead, touching the wound on his shoulder where the spear had grazed him. She pressed lightly, and he hissed in pain. She frowned, shaking her head as if frustrated by his fragility, but then whispered, "Still alive, strong." The hunters' voices faded as they moved deeper into the cavern, searching. Ryan let out a shaky breath of relief, but Kalira didn't relax. She kept watching him, her face tight with thought. Then, slowly, she pointed at his chest again, tapping where his heart beat beneath his skin. "Show more. Why you?" she asked. Ryan shook his head, helpless. He had no answer. All he could do was try to show her in other ways. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a broken piece of his emergency kit from the crash. It was cracked, the power core barely alive, but it still sparked faintly. Kalira's eyes widened when she saw it glow in his palm. She leaned closer, whispering something in awe. Ryan set the device on the ground and with a careful twist of wires connected it back to itself. The light steadied, glowing brighter, filling the tunnel with a soft blue light. Kalira gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Fix," she whispered in broken words. Her eyes locked on him with wonder. Ryan gave a tired smile. "Fix. Yes," he tapped his head. "Not just strong, smart." He knew she wouldn't catch all of it, but her expression told him she understood enough. She crouched lower, staring at the device, then back at him. "My people cannot," she whispered slowly. "You can." Her silver eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time, Ryan thought he saw respect instead of fear. But the moment did not last. A loud crash echoed through the cavern, the hunters shouting again, their voices angry and closer. Kalira's body tensed. She grabbed the small device quickly, hiding it under her cloak, then motioned for Ryan to follow. They crawled deeper into the tunnel, the stone scraping against Ryan's wounded arms, until they reached another chamber. This one was smaller, but the walls glittered with crystal veins, faintly glowing like stars in the dark. Kalira stopped, her chest heaving, and turned to him. "You not safe," she said softly, her voice trembling. "My people fear what they not know. They kill." She looked away for a moment, her lips pressed tightly together, before finally whispering, "But me? I not tell." She looked back at him, her silver eyes softer now. Ryan's chest tightened at her words. She was choosing to protect him, even knowing what it might cost her. Ryan sat down heavily on the stone, his body screaming for rest. Kalira lowered herself across from him, watching him quietly. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of the hunters grew faint again, leaving only the low hum of the crystals. Finally, Kalira broke the silence. She pointed at him, then at her own chest. Different, but maybe not danger. Her voice was careful, like she was testing each word. Ryan nodded slowly, meeting her gaze. "Not danger. Friend? The word seemed to strike her. She repeated it softly, her tongue stumbling. Fef, friend. Her lips curled slightly, almost like a smile, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by seriousness again. She looked away, her eyes fixed on the glowing walls. If my people know, she whispered, they take you, they break you. They ask why. Why you hard? Why you strong? Why cave listen? Her voice grew sharper, her words like broken pieces of glass. They not let you leave. They not let you live. Ryan listened in silence, his throat dry. He knew she was right. The moment her people discovered how different he would become nothing more than a thing to study, to control. He clenched his fists, whispering, I don't want that. Kalira looked back at him, her eyes narrowing. She studied him for a long time, then leaned forward slightly. Her hand lifted, trembling, before she pressed it against his chest again, feeling his heartbeat. She whispered one word, low and certain. Hope. The sound of that word struck Ryan harder than any spear. He stared at her, shocked. She had gone from calling him danger to calling him hope. His chest tightened, and for the first time since the crash, he felt a spark of something other than fear. She believed, at least a little, that he was not just a problem, but maybe an answer. Before he could speak, the crystals around them pulsed suddenly, glowing brighter. Both of them turned sharply toward the entrance of the chamber. Heavy footsteps echoed again, closer, louder, shaking the stone. The hunters had followed them. Kalira's hand dropped from his chest, and her face hardened. She reached for a crystal blade, her body tensing like a predator ready to strike. She looked at him once more, her silver eyes fierce. No choice now. We fight or die. Ryan gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet despite the pain. His blood ran down his arm, his body exhausted, but he forced himself to stand tall. Kalira's blade shimmered faintly in the crystal light, and Ryan tightened his grip on the broken branch he still carried. The sound of the hunters' voices grew louder, echoing down the tunnel. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest, but Kalira's earlier word burned in his mind. Hope. He met her eyes and gave a firm nod. If this was the choice, then he would fight, not just for his life, but for hers too. The echo of the hunter's boots shook the stone walls as Ryan tightened his grip on the branch. His hands were slick with blood and sweat, but he refused to let it slip. Kalira stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing in the dim light, her crystal blade held tightly in her hand. The tunnel filled with the glow of red spears as the first of the hunters pushed through the vines, their faces twisted with anger and triumph. They had cornered their prey, and they knew it. Ryan felt his chest rise and fall in heavy breaths, but his eyes did not waver. He had been in battles before, and though this world was strange and the enemy unknown, the feeling of being hunted was the same. The first hunter lunged forward, his spear aimed at Ryan's chest. Ryan ducked, swinging his branch upward with all his strength. The wood cracked against the glowing shaft of the spear, shattering the tip into sparks of light. The force sent the alien stumbling back, growling in shock. Kalira did not waste the moment. She leaped forward, her blade flashing as it cut across another hunter's arm. He roared, clutching his wound, his weapon clattering to the stone floor. For a moment, Ryan and Kalira stood back to back, their breaths loud, their bodies tense, as more hunters crowded into the chamber. Ryan's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he forced his body to move, swinging wildly, blocking strikes with his branch, shoving enemies back with sheer weight. He was smaller than them, weaker by their standards, but his movements were unpredictable. He fought with desperation, with stubborn human willpower that refused to break. A hunter slammed into him, knocking him against the wall. Pain exploded across his back, but Ryan used the closeness to his advantage. He slammed his forehead into the alien's face, feeling the crunch of bone. The hunter staggered back, dazed, and Ryan tore the spear from his grip. Now he held something sharper, something real. Kalira's blade clashed against another spear, sparks flying as she twisted her body with grace. She moved fast, but when one hunter swung low and caught her leg, she stumbled. Ryan saw it and did not think. He charged, driving the stolen spear into the attacker's side. The hunter screamed, collapsing in shock. Kalira looked up at Ryan, her eyes wide, a mixture of surprise and something else. Something that made her pause for just a heartbeat before she pushed herself back up and stood beside him again. But there were too many. The chamber filled with hunters, their shouts echoing against the crystal walls. Ryan fought until his arms felt like they were on fire, but eventually one spear struck his side, grazing deep. He fell to one knee, blood pouring down his body. Kalira screamed his name, her voice sharp with fear, and tried to shield him with her blade. The hunters surrounded them now, circling like wolves, their eyes burning with victory. Ryan tried to rise again, but his body refused. His vision blurred, the world tilting dangerously. One hunter stepped forward, larger than the rest, his spear glowing brighter. He raised it high, pointing it at Ryan's chest. He shouted words Ryan did not understand, but the tone carried death in every sound. The others laughed, their voices cruel and mocking. To them, the human was nothing but a weak outsider, a fragile creature who had fought longer than expected, but would still die on their stone. Ryan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet even as his legs shook. If he was going to die, he would not kneel. He would face them standing. The spear thrust forward, but before it could strike, Kalira moved. With a cry that shook the chamber, she threw herself between Ryan and the weapon. The glowing tip stopped inches from her chest as she raised her blade and blocked the strike. Gasps echoed through the hunters. They stepped back, shocked, their eyes wide. Kalira stood firm, her body trembling but her voice strong as she shouted in her language. Ryan could not understand the words, but the defiance in her tone was unmistakable. She was protecting him. She was defying them. The leader snarled and barked in order. Two hunters grabbed Kalira's arms, pulling her away from Ryan. She struggled, screaming, her blade clattering to the ground as they held her tight. The leader raised his spear again, pointing it directly at Ryan. His intent was clear: finish the human, silence this strange anomaly. But when the weapon drew close, Kalira screamed louder, thrashing against the grip of her kin. Her voice cracked with desperation, calling out words Ryan could not understand but could feel in his chest. The hunters hesitated, unsure now. Ryan saw the hesitation and acted. With the last of his strength, he lunged forward, slamming into the leader. The spear tip grazed his ribs, tearing his flesh, but he didn't stop. He drove his shoulder into the alien's chest, knocking him backward into the crystal pillar. The impact shook the chamber, and the pillar blazed with sudden light. The hunters cried out, stumbling back as the glow spread through every crystal in the cavern, flooding the chamber with blinding brightness. The air hummed with energy, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Kalira froze, her silver eyes wide with awe. The hunters loosened their grip on her, too distracted by the impossible sight. Ryan, barely standing, pressed his bloody hand against the pillar. The glow grew stronger, the hum louder, until the entire cavern sang with energy. The hunters staggered back, shielding their eyes, fear replacing their earlier triumph. One of them shouted, his voice shaking, calling Ryan something in their tongue that made Kalira gasp. She looked at Ryan, trembling, and whispered the translation in broken human words. Chosen. The hunters hesitated now, their spears lowered. The leader, groaning on the ground, glared with fury but did not rise again. Kalira stumbled to Ryan's side, catching him as his knees buckled. She whispered urgently, They see now. You not weak. You not prey. You, danger to them. You, maybe more. Her voice shook, but her arms held him tightly, keeping him from collapsing. Ryan's vision dimmed, but he could still see the way the hunters stared at him now. No longer mocking, no longer certain. Fear and confusion clouded their faces. Kalira's grip tightened, her voice steady even through her fear. They not kill you now, but they not forget. You break law, you break power. Now, you belong to them, or to me. Ryan could not answer. His body finally gave out, and darkness swallowed him. The last thing he felt was Kalira's arms holding him, her whisper hot against his ear. I keep you safe, even if my people call me traitor. Ryan woke to the sound of voices, low and sharp, echoing across the stone chamber. His body ached all over, every muscle screaming, but it was the heat of Kalira's hand pressed against his chest that kept him from drifting back into darkness. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The glow of the crystals still painted the walls, but now the chamber was crowded. Dozens of alien warriors stood in a circle, their spears raised, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and anger. At the center of them stood Kalira, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her silver eyes burning with a strange light. She was standing between him and her people, her body a shield, her voice strong even as it trembled. Ryan tried to sit up, but Kalira's hand pressed him back down. She whispered quickly, "Stay, weak." Her eyes flicked to him, filled with urgency, then back to the circle of hunters. The leader, the one he had slammed into the crystal, stepped forward, blood running down his face. His glare was filled with fury as he shouted in his tongue, pointing at Ryan again and again. The other warriors nodded, their voices rising, a chant forming in the cavern. Ryan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They wanted him dead. Kalira shouted back, her voice cutting through the chants. She spoke fast, her tone defiant, her body trembling with the weight of standing alone against her clan. Her people fell into silence, listening, though their eyes still burned with hostility. Kalira turned suddenly, kneeling beside Ryan, her hand gripping his tightly. She raised their joined hands high, showing everyone. The gasp that ran through the chamber told Ryan this was not something they expected. She looked back at her people, her voice steady now as she declared more words in her language, her other hand pressed firmly against her chest. The silence stretched for long seconds before a ripple of outrage burst through the crowd. Several hunters shouted angrily, their spears stabbing toward the ground. Others whispered to one another, their faces filled with uncertainty. The leader snarled, his voice sharp, but Kalira cut across him again, her words ringing louder. Ryan stared at her, not knowing what she had said, but he could feel it in her grip. Whatever she had declared, it was not small. Finally, she leaned close, her lips almost at his ear. Her whisper was soft but clear. "I claim you. My right. My choice." Ryan's breath caught. He didn't fully understand what it meant in her culture, but the effect was immediate. Her people froze, their spears lowering slightly, their voices hushed. Even the leader stepped back, his face twisting with rage but also hesitation. Kalira straightened, still gripping Ryan's hand tightly, her silver eyes locked on her people with unyielding fire. The leader shouted again, but this time his voice cracked, not with power but with desperation. The elders of the clan, robed figures who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the crystal light. They murmured among themselves, then raised their hands to silence everyone. The cavern fell quiet, so quiet Ryan could hear his own heartbeat pounding. One of the elders spoke slowly, his voice deep and measured, his gaze fixed on Ryan. Though Ryan couldn't understand the words, the tone carried weight. Kalira bowed her head slightly but did not let go of Ryan's hand. The elder's eyes softened, and he gestured toward Ryan, then toward Kalira. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some faces showed disgust, others fear, but a few looked almost thoughtful. The leader roared in anger, his spear striking the ground in sparks, but the elders ignored him. They turned and left the chamber slowly, their robes whispering across the stone. The rest of the clan lowered their spears reluctantly, their anger still burning but contained by the weight of the elders' silence. Kalira finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging, though she still kept herself tall. She turned to Ryan, her silver eyes soft now, the fire in them replaced with something gentler. She helped him sit up slowly, her arms strong around his back. "Safe for now," she whispered. Ryan's chest was tight, his throat dry, but he managed to whisper back, "What did you do?" Kalira looked at him for a long moment, then touched his hand to her chest, over her heart. "I bind. You, mine. They cannot kill what I protect." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what she had done. Ryan stared at her, stunned. She had tied her fate to his in front of her entire people, risking being seen as a traitor, risking everything. He wanted to speak, to tell her she didn't have to, but the way she looked at him silenced the words. She had made her choice, and nothing he said could change it. Her hand lingered on his chest, her eyes holding his, and for the first time he saw not just curiosity or fear in them. He saw belief. The warriors began to leave the chamber, their steps heavy with frustration. The leader glared one last time, his eyes promising that this fight was not over, before disappearing into the shadows. Kalira helped Ryan to his feet, her body close, supporting his weight as they stepped deeper into the cavern where the glow was softer, calmer. She led him to a stone ledge, helping him sit, then crouched beside him, her hand still gripping his as though she feared he might vanish. The silence between them was thick, but it was not empty. Ryan's heart still pounded from the danger, but his mind lingered on her words. She had claimed him, Not as a prisoner, not as prey, but as something hers to guard. It was strange, it was dangerous, but it was also the first time since the crash that he felt he wasn't alone. Kalira leaned her head slightly, her silver hair brushing against his arm. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. You live because I choose, but also because you fight like no other. Human spirit, not weak. Ryan closed his eyes, exhausted, but her words kept him awake. He did not know what would come next, whether her people would accept him, whether the hunters would try again, whether the crystal cave would reveal more secrets. But one thing was certain. Kalira had bound herself to him, and in doing so, she had given him not just protection, but something deeper. A fragile thread of trust, woven in a world that wanted him dead. As the cavern dimmed to silence, Ryan lay back against the stone, Kalira's hand still resting on his chest. For the first time since the crash, he felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by something else entirely. Not safety, not certainty, but the beginning of something that could change both their fates forever.